All right, today we're jumping right into a huge turning point for investment banking. See, in the years right after the 2008 crisis, the whole industry got turned on its head. It was a real battle for survival, and the old ways of doing things, well, they just didn't work anymore. Welcome to the new financial jungle. To really get what was happening around 2013, you have to imagine the market as this dense, unforgiving jungle. The biggest predators, the giant banks, they were still out there, but the whole environment had changed under their feet. The things that used to make you king of the jungle, like just being huge and aggressive, weren't enough to guarantee you to eat. So what was at the heart of all this change? It was one simple, brutal fact. The money was drying up. The industry was facing this massive, almost existential collapse in profits, and it was threatening the very foundation of their business models. I mean, before the crisis, life was pretty sweet for the big banks. We're talking about a healthy after-tax return on equity, or ROE, consistently in that 15 to 20% range. That number, that was the gold standard of success. But by 2012, boom, that number got chopped in half. And the forecast for the future was even worse, projected to settle somewhere in this kind of depressing 7 to 10% range. This wasn't just a bad quarter. This was people asking, can this industry even make money in the long run? So here's the key takeaway from that. The world absolutely still needed investment banks, to help companies raise money and manage risk. That job wasn't going anywhere. But the value the banks could squeeze out of doing that job was just plummeting. The game had changed. It was no longer about being the biggest, it was about being the fittest. So you've got to be asking, what was causing this massive profit squeeze? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful combo of forces that were basically terraforming the entire landscape. You can really think of it as a perfect storm. First, you had this absolute tidal wave of new regulations. Then you had a flood of new, hungry competitors, like hedge funds, who didn't have to play by the same rules. And finally, you had the relentless march of technology, automating everything and just crushing profit margins. Now, check this out, because this is wild. The regulations alone were a massive deal. Rules like Basel III, which made banks hold way more capital, were projected to slice a full 10 percentage points off their ROE. And as you can see here, by 2013, they'd already felt about 2/3 of that pain, but there was still another third of it on the way. Ouch. And this slide really nails that technology pressure. Look at this life cycle. Products used to start out as bespoke, custom-made, high-margin stuff. But as tech made them easier to standardize, the volume went up and the margins started to fall. Pretty soon, they hit maturity, becoming high-volume, super low-margin products, until finally, they're just a commodity. And when something's a commodity, the only thing that matters is price. Tech was basically squeezing the profit out of everything it could touch. Now, these pressures, they didn't hit everybody the same way. Nope. In fact, they drove this huge wedge right through the middle of the industry, creating this massive gap between the haves and the have-nots. And here's that divide, plain and simple. On one side, you had the Tier 1 banks, the global giants. They had the scale, the money, the resources to pour into the best technology. And on the other side, you had the smaller, Tier 2 banks, who were just getting left in the dust, stuck with tight budgets and clunky old systems. And this gap wasn't just theoretical. You could see it in the raw numbers. In a key area like interest rates, a salesperson at a Tier 1 bank could be nearly twice as productive as someone at a Tier 2 firm. We're talking almost double the revenue. That difference is absolutely massive. And here's the engine behind that productivity gap. I mean, look at this. This chart tells the whole story. The IT budgets for Tier 2 banks were less than 40% of what their giant rivals were spending. It's not just that they were losing the technology race, they could barely afford to be in it. So this widening gap forced every single bank to a moment of truth. They had to make some really tough, deliberate choices about who they were going to be. Because if they didn't choose a path for themselves, the market was going to choose one for them. And you can bet it wouldn't be a pretty one. So how do you make a choice that big? Well, the first step was to look through what they called the client lens. This basically meant getting brutally honest and asking two questions. One, who are our most important customers? And two, what do they actually need from us that we can be the best in the world at providing? The second step was the product lens. This was an equally ruthless look in the mirror. It meant asking, where can we realistically be a top 3 player? Not top 10, not top 5, top 3. If you can't be one of the best, you have to seriously ask yourself why you're even playing that game.
Put those two lenses together, and you get this process. First, you screen every single thing you do. Then, you sort them into 3 buckets. Is this a fully fledged business we're going to invest in to win? Is it a presence business we kind of need to have but won't lead in? Or is it something we need to just exit and walk away from?
Okay, so after facing all that pressure and after making all those gut-wrenching choices, what does a survivor in this new financial jungle actually look like? Well, the analysis at the time predicted that 6 distinct winning models would climb out of the chaos. And here they are. This table just lays out the 6 different paths to victory. You could be a powerhouse, just built on massive scale. Or you could be the total opposite, like a haute couture firm, creating super complex, high-margin stuff. You could focus on relationships or become a nimble advisory specialist. That last one is a really smart play, by the way. It requires very little capital, which means it mostly avoids all those heavy new regulations we talked about. Each one was a totally viable, but very different strategy. And for the banks that actually picked a lane and executed it with discipline, the rewards were huge. Just look at this. Potential ROEs of 14, 16, even over 30%. This was proof that you could not only survive, but actually thrive and blow that dismal 7 to 10% industry average out of the water. In the end, what this all shows is that in the new financial jungle, survival of the fittest wasn't about being the biggest beast anymore. It was about being the most focused, the most deliberate. It all came down to choice, which leaves us with one last thing to think about. If you were in their shoes, facing this new reality, which path would you take?